The candles trembled when her breath did, guttering low, then straightening again like they were refusing to be wished on. Arya tightened her fingers against the armrests of her wheelchair and tried to lean in. The distance between her and the cake might as well have been a mile. Heat seared her cheeks. Someone at a nearby table laughed at something else. The room went soft around the edges. "Do you need help?" a small voice asked, right at her elbow. She glanced up. A boy stood there, solemn and bright, a gap between his front teeth and a spill of dark hair over his forehead. A star-shaped pendant swung at his throat, scuffed silver, dented at one tip like a crescent bite. Behind him, a man, 30-something, broad-shouldered in a work jacket with his sleeves pushed up, hovered uncertainly. "Max," he said, gentle. "Give the lady a second." Arya steadied her breath. She had chosen this tiny patisserie because nobody would know her here, because glass and brass and buttercream made a sanctuary, because the city glittered on the other side of the floor to ceiling windows and the Hale International logo across the street caught sunlight like a blade. "It's okay," she told the boy, her voice almost steady. "I'm a little out of practice." Max leaned in conspiratorially. "My dad says birthdays are team sports." He lifted his chin toward the man. "We do power-up breaths together." Heat that wasn't all candlelight climbed Arya's neck. "Do you?" she asked, smiling without meaning to. The man, Ethan, offered a sheepish half-grin. "Only if invited," he said, hands raised. "We didn't mean to intrude." Arya inhaled. She looked at the forest of flames. The tiny sugar daisies on the cake were beginning to wilt at the edges. "It's my birthday. I'm 26. Max's eyes rounded. "That's so many." He looked back at his father, then back at Arya. "We can hold the plate so it doesn't move. That helps. And we can whisper the song so no one hears. It's the rules." Arya let out a breath that wobbled into a laugh. It startled her, the sound. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." Ethan stepped forward, and for a second she flinched at a stranger so near. He saw it and stilled, waiting. He had the worn, careful movements of someone who fixed things for a living, measured, precise. When she nodded, he reached out and steadied the plate with 2 fingers just at the edge of the cardboard disc, so the heat wouldn't scorch him. Max planted his elbows on the table like a baseball player at bat. "Ready," Max whispered. He didn't wait for an answer. His lips shaped the words soundlessly, "Happy birthday, dear," his little chest filling, emptying. Arya's throat burned. She drew a deep breath, lifted her chin, and blew. The closest candles went first, then a stubborn line near the back wobbled and held. Max puffed beside her, making only the tiniest breeze. "Team sport," he stage whispered, eyes gleaming. The last flame finally bent and went out. The patisserie's gold bell silence swelled. Arya blinked through the hot sting in her eyes and laughed again, this time unguarded, when Max clapped once, loud in the hush, and then looked mortified at his own noise. "Do it again," he whispered. "Just one so you can wish by yourself." Ethan cleared his throat. "If you'd like, we can relight one." Something in Arya settled at the idea. "Yes," she said, surprising herself. "One." Ethan found a matchbook near the napkins. This place was the sort that branded even the matches and coaxed a single wick back to life. Arya stared at the small, honest flame. She didn't make the kind of wishes that could be spoken out loud anymore. She let the breath build slow in her chest, let the room fade, and gave the flame a steady, contained gust. It went out obediently. Max threw his arms up in silent triumph. "Power up." Ethan looked at her as if he recognized something in the moment that wasn't for him to ask about. "Happy birthday," he said softly. "Thank you." Arya realized her hands had stopped trembling. She sliced the cake with the small gold server provided, her fingers finding the motion without looking, and passed plates. Max accepted his with reverence. He sat across from her, swinging his legs, the star pendant flashing each time his body moved. "Do you like stars?" he asked between careful bites. "I used to," Arya said. "I still do." He lifted the pendant in explanation. "This came with me," he said, matter of fact. "Dad says I should always keep it because it's my first treasure." Something fragile inside Arya went starkly still. Up close, the pendant was not just dented. A tiny crescent had been carved at one tip, an imperfect bite that matched the scoop missing from the star charm on the bracelet on her wrist. The bracelet was slim silver with beads, a single small star shape absent from its circle. She had unclasped the star in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and citrus. She had slid it into the swaddle of a newborn whose damp hair had stuck to her fingers. She had been 19, and she had been in love, and the world had already started to pull like riptide. The room shifted. The patisserie's warm clatter traveled to her as if through glass. "That's beautiful," she said, careful, steady. "Where did you get it?" "From the hospital," Max replied, with the unconcerned ownership of a child who didn't have to reach back into dark rooms alone. "Dad said the lady said it was important." Ethan set down his fork. "The agency did," he clarified, unsurprised by the question. He had the look of a man who had been asked about his son's beginnings often enough to have ready, firm answers. "They said it came with him and that we should keep it with him, so we have." "Which agency?" Arya asked, casual and dying. "Redwood Families," Ethan said, through. "The Hale Foundation, actually. The grant covered some of the placement costs." He nodded toward the skyline visible through the glass, the familiar chrome and obsidian spire with H. Quotes in its steel bones. "You know the one." Arya couldn't help it. She looked away. The Hale building's mirrored skin threw sunlight back onto the cafe floor like confetti. The irony tasted like metal in her mouth. She could feel Victor's hand in it in that too neat way he had philanthropy as PR scaffolding. "Miss Hale," a server interrupted, arriving with a narrow carafe of water and a cluster of meringues. "Did you want?" Ethan's posture shifted a fraction. Arya felt the change in him like a temperature drop. "Just water is fine," she said quickly then to Ethan, giving up the secret that speech had threatened to pry open anyway. "Arya, my name is Arya." He nodded once tight. "Ethan," he said. "I think you met Max." Max, oblivious to the adult currents, had toppled half his meringues into his lap and was trying to return them to the plate with careful hands. Arya leaned forward and slid a napkin across. His cheeks pinked with embarrassment, he pressed the napkin to the sugar like a poultice. "When is Max's birthday?" The question came out gentler than it felt. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He glanced at his son, considered. "June 18th, he said at last. 7 years ago, just before dawn." "The file says he was early." Arya saw the hour in her mind as if she were still tethered to it. 4:12 a.m. A sky the exact color of wet slate, the window in the hospital room like cracked ice. She had been alone until she wasn't, and then the baby had been in her arms, and she had pressed a star into flannel, and then, "Do you feel sick?" Max asked, peering at her. "You went white. That happens to my dad if he stands up too fast." "I'm okay," Arya said faintly. A small, comma-shaped birthmark rested on Max's wrist where his pulse beat, tiny, dark, right at the vein. She had seen it on herself as a child, under a bath's skim of bubbles. She had seen it on her father's inner wrist when he rolled up his sleeves to sign. "Family tracer. Accident of genetics as personal as a fingerprint." She had to put her hands flat on the table to keep them from seeking the wheel rims of her chair like a need to flee. Ethan watched her closely. He had good instincts. She could see them come to attention, the spooling caution of a good father. "Max," he said quietly, "do you want to go pick out some macarons for later? That rainbow box," Max brightened. "Can I pick the colors?" "All the colors," Ethan said. "But just 6. Max hopped down and scampered toward the display case, the star pendant bouncing. Ethan turned back to Arya slowly. "All right," he said, "you should tell me what you're thinking." Arya took a breath, then another, and reached for her bracelet with her left hand. She rotated it to show the thin space where a star had once sat. "When I was 19, she said, keeping her voice low, "I had a baby. I was told he was stillborn. I was not in a position to argue, and I was not allowed to hold him for long." The words tore on the way out and left her raw. "I had a bracelet like this. I took off the star and tucked it into his swaddle so I would know him if anything." Ethan's jaw tightened. Skepticism stayed in his eyes, but it had shifted into something else too, sorrow or fury or both. "The star could be a coincidence," he said softly. "It could," Arya agreed. She would not beg, but his birthday, June 18th, matches. The mark. Her eyes flicked to Ethan's wrist in explanation, then back to his face. "And Redwood Families was funded by my father's foundation. That foundation is controlled by a board that reports to him. He controls it." Ethan rubbed his thumb against the edge of his plate. "I adopted Max through legal channels," he said carefully. "He was a safe haven infant. The paperwork said his mother was unknown. If anyone falsified records," his voice grew rough. "I took him home from a sterile room smelling like bleach and overcooked coffee. He was jaundiced and so small I was afraid to breathe near him. I didn't steal him, I loved him." "I don't think you did," Arya said. She met his eyes and held them, even as the floor seemed to tilt under her. "I think we were both lied to." Max was still at the counter, mouth open at the splendor of color. The girl behind glass was explaining the difference between lavender and blackcurrant. Max's hand hovered over holographic tongs while he made a plan to conquer the spectrum. Ethan pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and began scrolling, jaw working. When he found what he needed, he turned the screen to face her. A PDF filled the display, a letter from Redwood Families with the Hale Foundation's Dove and Son logo at the header. Placement finalization, the subject line read. The baby's intake label was a number and the words mother, unknown. Aria's stomach lurched so sharply she had to sit back. She had signed donation checks on stationery with that same Dove and Son. She had smiled in photographs at ribbon cuttings while her father's hand was a brand on her shoulder. She had believed in goodness like a thing you could put on the calendar. I don't want to rip your son out of his life, she said, aware of how easily desperation could be misread. I am not here to do that. I want to know him. I want to undo what someone did to all of us if I can, she swallowed. And I want to make sure whoever did this can't do it again. Ethan looked at her for a long time, measuring. The patisserie's hum folded around them, espresso hissing, spoons tapping porcelain. Max pressed his face to the glass to assess a pistachio macaron's true greenness. All right, Ethan said at last. If we're going to test, we do it right, with counsel. With a child psychologist advising, no blindsiding Max, no sudden changes. Relief bloomed so fast in Aria that it shocked her dizzy. Yes, she said. Tomorrow, I can bring a lawyer I trust. We'll meet somewhere neutral. We'll take a swab, run both. You can have copies of anything before anyone else sees them. Ethan nodded. Tomorrow, he agreed. I'll bring his file, the redacted one, and the one they eventually gave me with more detail. His mouth twisted. It wasn't much more. Aria's phone buzzed against the tabletop as if her father had been listening in through the sugar tongs. She flipped it and saw the message, board meets at 7, I'll collect you. No distractions tonight. She turned the screen face down without replying. Is that? Ethan started, then stopped himself. My father, Aria said simply. Victor Hale. Ethan absorbed that in silence. If he knew the name, and most people did, he kept any commentary to himself. We'll talk tomorrow, he said. We'll do it right. Max returned with his prize, holding the box like a crown. I got a rainbow, he announced, and one that looks like a cloud. The girl said it tastes like vanilla but with a fancier accent. Vanilla with a fancier accent, Ethan repeated dutifully. We'll see. Max looked up at Aria. Do you want the cloud? He asked. It's for wishes. Aria nearly said no. Habit, politeness, the reflex of someone who had learned to want nothing in rooms full of everything. Instead, she nodded. I would, she said. Thank you. They ate another sliver of cake. The sugar rush made Max chatter about soccer cleats and a missing homework assignment and the way pigeons on the plaza outside did a little hop when they walked, like they'd forgotten how to fly. It was ordinary and perfect. People in better shoes than hers moved past the windows on their way to whatever people moved toward in this part of the city. The Hale building watched, faceted and indifferent. A shadow fell across their table then, just long enough to notice. The door's bell chimed. A small entourage, 2 assistants with laptops, a security man with an earpiece swept past the pastry case to the counter. Their center of gravity was a man in a navy coat. On another day, Aria would have spotted him by the line of his shoulders alone. Rowan Wilder had grown into the angles time had hinted at. He had always been made of contrast, gentle hands, sharp mind, a laugh at odds with how hard he worked. Now he wore success like he'd tailored it himself, but when he turned his face toward the room, there was the same quick intelligence in his eyes, the same twitch at the mouth that came before a smile. He was ordering a coffee when he looked up and saw her. For a moment, the years dropped away. She could feel his breath on her neck in their first apartment, could see the wobble of a second-hand ceiling fan under a watercolor of their future. And then reality thudded back, her chair, the cake, the boy with the star. Rowan took one step, stopped, took another as if the floor might give under him. He was careful not to look at her chair as a question. Happy birthday, he said. He remembered, of course he did. Max squinted at him. Do you know her? He asked, direct as sunlight. Rowan's gaze flicked to Max's pendant, then to the empty space on Aria's bracelet, and something flashed through his expression, a recognition like lightning over dark water. We used to, he said softly. A long time ago. Ethan shifted almost imperceptibly, placing himself between Max and this stranger in a navy coat. It wasn't hostile, just a protective geometry so practiced it was grace. Rowan, Arya said. Her mouth had gone dry. There was history in the way she shaped his name. There were also minds everywhere and a child at the table. This is Ethan and his son, Max. Rowan nodded to Ethan. Rowan Wilder. He didn't add his title. He didn't need to. Ethan's jaw tightened. I've read your interviews, he said, neutral. He had the steady look of a man who recognized power and had learned to keep his hands at his sides in its presence. If Rowan felt the check, he took it with a small incline of the head. To Arya, he said, "May I later?" 5 minutes. Arya thought of the signed letter that had come years ago, her name in a hand almost but not quite like hers, telling him to stay away or face the weight of her father's legal machine. She saw the wound that letter had carved and the stony resolve it had fed. Her heart beat against its own cage. "Yes," she said. "Later." Rowan's coffee arrived. He lingered a second maybe for her to say more, maybe to say more himself, and then he stepped back, collected his cup, and let the entourage tug him toward the door. As he left, he glanced at Max one last time. The boy had gone back to arranging macarons in the box by color strength. The star at his throat winked. Grace appeared at Arya's shoulder without fanfare, a barrier and a bridge in one. "Car's ready," she murmured. Grace had been with Arya through the worst of the last 2 years. She knew how to make space when everyone else crowded it. "In a minute," Arya said. She thought of her father's text and felt nothing like apology in the refusal. They paid. Ethan stubbornly refused to let her cover anything beyond the cake she'd ordered, and she didn't argue because it widened the fragile space of normal between them and gathered coats. Arya slipped the extra star-shaped meringue into a napkin for later without knowing why. At the curb, the city's cold kissed her face. Ethan's truck was parked behind a rideshare with a crooked sticker and ahead of a sedan with a driver texting with 2 thumbs. The hail building threw their reflections back at them, small and mortal and strangely defiant. "Tomorrow," Ethan said. It wasn't a question, but it carried all the weight of one. "Tomorrow," Arya echoed. "I'll bring someone I trust. We'll do the swabs. We'll read the file." Ethan nodded and then crouched so he was level with Max in the truck's open doorway. "Say goodbye, bud." Max wriggled an arm free of his puffy sleeve and waved enthusiastically. "Bye, Arya," he said. "Happy birthday again. Next time I'll teach you my soccer trick." "You can do it sitting down." "I'd like that," Arya said, and knew she meant more than she was allowed to say today. "Thank you, Max." He considered her with grave importance. Then he lifted his pendant and pressed it to his lips in a kiss before letting it fall. "It's for luck," he confided. When their truck pulled away, Arya stood for a moment in a draft of wind that smelled like cinnamon and exhaust. Rowan's navy coat flickered into being again across the plaza, his entourage slowed by someone's question. He looked back once, and that was enough to confirm that, yes, this was happening in this life, not another. Grace took the handles of Arya's chair with practiced ease. "You're shaking," she said. "I'm not afraid," Arya answered, and she wasn't. Shocked, yes. Split open, yes. But under the fissure was something steady, a new seam of steel she hadn't felt in so long she barely remembered it. Grace's eyebrows lifted. "Good," she said simply. "I like you this way." In the car, Arya let her head rest against the glass. The city streamed by in sheets of light. Her phone buzzed again, and again she ignored it. She opened her hand and pressed her fingers into the thin chain of her bracelet until it dug crescents into her skin. The missing star had always been an ache. She hadn't realized it could also be a map. Later, in the private corner of a hotel lobby where she and Rowan had agreed to meet, she would say what needed to be said and listen to what needed to be heard. She would name the doctor from Redwood Families and the night in the hospital and the year of silence. He would admit to a letter he had never believed but could not defeat. They would build a plan from there, careful and clean. For now, she watched her reflection flicker in the window, candles in a pane of night, and curled her fingers around the paper napkin with the sugar-dusted star inside. She lifted it, tasted it, vanilla, yes, but with a fancier accent. She smiled in spite of everything, and in the space between sweetness and salt, she made a second wish. Not for the past, which was gone, for what could be saved and what could be built, for a boy with a star and the men who would stand on either side of him while she learned how to stand for herself. Outside, the wind tugged at the flags above Hale International's doors. Inside, the boardroom was likely already polishing its glasses for 7 o'clock. Let it. She had another appointment first, with truth, with old love, with the kind of beginning that didn't require permission. The city kept moving. Arya's phone lit up again with her father's name and went dark when she let it. In the dim of the car's back seat, she opened her palm. Sugar glittered there. She pressed the meringue star into her skin until it softened with heat, and when she finally lifted her hand, an impression lingered, a small five-pointed shape, an imperfect seal. Tomorrow, she thought, and the word held like a promise. The days after the patisserie blurred into a series of controlled burns. By Monday afternoon, a discreet lab tech with a gentle voice swabbed Aria's cheek in a conference room that smelled like eucalyptus and polished wood. Ethan's conditions were firm: no photographs, no names on the paperwork, only anonymized codes and sealed envelopes. Max thought it was a tickle test they all had to do because grown-ups sometimes forget to laugh. He giggled on cue and asked if the cotton swab could touch his nose for fun. It did. He went with Grace for hot chocolate after. Rowan's legal contact, Mina Park, razor sharp in a quiet way, handled the chain of custody like it was a grenade with a ticking clock. Aria watched the samples disappear into a gray cooler and felt the world tip toward an answer. In the mornings, she went to physical therapy, braces buckled to her legs. She stood in a frame between parallel bars, sweat slick under her shirt, arms trembling with the weight of her body and the weight of what she was about to do. The therapist counted breaths. Aria counted seconds. Twice, she managed to stand without the frame, hands braced at table's edge. The second time, she stayed long enough for Grace to slide a mirror to catch her reflection. It wasn't a miracle. It was enough. On Tuesday evening, under a glass ceiling breathing out the last of the day's heat, Aria sat on a greenhouse terrace across from Rowan, a pot of mint between them releasing scent like a promise when the leaves were touched. He put the letter on the table between them before he said anything else. It was a scan, slightly skewed, of a legal document on Hale International letterhead. The signature at the bottom was almost hers. Almost. "They served me this the night before I was supposed to meet you," he said. "It didn't look like you, it didn't sound like you, but it had teeth. Cease any and all contact," it said, "under pain of prosecution." His jaw worked. "I kept it because I knew I'd need it someday. For what? I didn't know." Aria stared at the loop of the that wasn't quite right, the R that leaned the wrong way. She could see which of her public letters someone had used as the model. "I never wrote it," she said. "He took my phone. He took my keys. He sent me to a clinic under another name. He said he'd handle it, like I was a press release and not a person." Rowan tipped his head back and closed his eyes. For a moment, he looked not like the man whose face stared back from finance magazine covers, but like the boy she'd met at 18, already half-made by rage and tenderness, trying to hide both. "I should have fought harder," he said. "You were 21, Aria said. "You didn't have $1 billion war chest. He did." "That's never stopped me before," Rowan muttered. He opened his eyes. "But yes, I'm not interested in assigning myself heroics after the fact. I should have found a way. I didn't. I won't make that mistake again." They compared dates. They drew the lines between Redwood families and the Hale Foundation's grants. Dr. Mara Keene's name came up again and again, in press releases with smiling babies and on the bottom of memos with phrases like sensitive placement workflows. The Hale Foundation checking account number appeared like a recurring character in the story, balancing line items next to maternal dignity grants that Rowan's team would later map to something else entirely. "What if we're wrong?" Aria asked at one point, because hope and terror often wear the same face and she needed to give terror its say. "What if I'm just reaching for a star because it's the only one I can see?" Rowan looked at her wrist. "Aria," he said, voice steady, "sometimes the star is a map, sometimes it's also the destination. We'll follow the points. If they don't align, we stop. If they do, we don't." Ethan joined them the next morning with a box file that had been opened so often the cardboard had softened. He set it on the table like he was setting down his heart, then opened it to show the redacted pages and the not very less redacted ones that followed after months of asking, then demanding. "Baby boy, intake 1733, he read, not looking at them like he was a priest intoning a rite. Mother, unknown, father, not applicable. He tapped the Hale Foundation header on the cover email. "This is the introduction they gave me to my son." He told them about the first time he saw Max, a little body swimming in a hospital blanket, a nurse with kindness in her eyes who slipped him an extra bottle and a star-shaped pendant in a plastic bag because this came with him, and it felt wrong to separate them. He told them about the milk jaundice and the long night of breathing, terrified and in love. He told them about the way Max smiled at ceiling fans as if they were telling him secrets. "I won't have him torn apart by this," he said, finally looking up, "but I also won't let him grow up under a lie that gets into his bones." Those are hard to scrub out. His hand found the star at his own throat. He wore a simple band of steel, nothing else, and dropped. "We move slowly. We involve a family therapist. We tell him the truth in pieces he can hold." "I agree," Arya said. "He can't lose his dad, and I want him to have what I didn't both, a father and a mother who show up." She looked to Rowan. "If the tests say what we think they'll say, we'll have to figure out what to call each other in his life." Rowan's mouth twitched. "Large, friendly silhouettes on the horizon," he suggested. "Then maybe Rowan until he chooses. I don't need a title to love him." They all exhaled, humor loosening a knot that had been threatening to strangle them. By Thursday, Mina had a folder thick enough to slam down and make a sound. Inside, internal Redwood emails, obtained by a source who wanted to wash her hands clean. A wire ledger linking Hale Foundation grants to Category S high-sensitivity placements, with codes noting reputational risk, corporate family. A line item, date stamped the morning of June 18th, 7 years ago, included a single sentence in a notes column. "Resolved anomaly per directive. Mother comforted, confidentiality assured." Mina had also tracked down a nurse who had left the city 2 years after Arya's delivery and had been trying not to live with what she knew. In an audio statement, the nurse's voice swallowed and steadied. "Orders came from the family, not from attending," she said. "We were told to switch doctors mid-shift, clear the corridor, no visitors. Security stood where family should have stood. The mother, she was a kid, really kept asking for the baby. She had this bracelet with a star. She said she marked him because she was afraid someone would take him, and then they did." The nurse's breath hitched. "I told myself he must have been placed somewhere good. I'm not sure that absolves anything." When the DNA results came, Arya opened the envelope in the same greenhouse where she and Rowan had made a treaty with their old ghosts. Ethan stood with them, hands braced on the back of a chair, as if the furniture could keep him upright if the room spun. It wasn't even dramatic in the end, just a page with percentages and language so clean it felt clinical enough to kill. Maternity 99.999%, paternity 99.998%. Arya didn't cry at first. She laughed, one bright, ruined sound that wove grief and relief into a single thread. Rowan closed his eyes and then put his hand over hers on the table like he could anchor her there if the ground gave way. Ethan bowed his head as if in prayer. When Arya's laugh shivered, it broke into tears like rain after heat. "Okay," she said when she could speak. "Okay. We're going to do this right." Victor's gala was Friday night. "Innovation and integrity," the invitation said in embossed type, because the world was not without a sense of humor. The ballroom was a glass box 15 stories up, strung with lines of light like a star chart, and filled with people in black and silver whose laughter bounced from surface to surface with nowhere soft to land. Arya arrived in a simple dark dress and her braces, Grace at her side. The braces locked her legs straight beneath the skirt. She used forearm crutches to move the first dozen steps from the elevator bank, then took her chair without apology. Heads turned. The whispers that followed were a weather she knew how to walk through. Rowan came in quiet, no entourage tonight, the set of his mouth the only giveaway that he was ready to drive a steel beam through the center of the evening. Ethan followed in a dark suit that didn't pretend to be more than it was. He checked his watch twice, the way a man does when he knows a kid across town is coloring in a lounge with a woman who remembers when he preferred trains to crayons. "Ready?" Rowan asked. His face was uncharacteristically careful when he offered his arm to help her up, or as ready as people ever are to jump out of airplanes without parachutes. Arya smiled without humor. "I prefer to believe we've been building the parachute all week," she said. Victor basked under the stage lights, voice smooth, charm calibrated to the room like a thermostat. He spoke about mentorship and impact, about building the city's skyline and its moral architecture. He thanked the Hale Foundation for its work with mothers and children and mentioned Redwood families with a proprietary glow. Iris Tan stood off to one side, lips pressed in a line that sold seriousness and no-nonsense ethics to cameras. She met Arya's eyes once across the crowd and flinched like someone looking at the edge of a cliff for the first time. After the applause, Arya raised her hand. She didn't wait to be called on. She propelled herself forward, and when she reached the small set of stairs leading to the stage, Grace was suddenly there on one side and Rowan on the other. They steadied her as she stood, the braces locking with a muted click. The room stilled. Somewhere a flute of champagne tilted and steadied. "Miss Hale," Victor said into the mic, his composure flickering, then forcing itself smooth. "To what do we owe?" "I have something to say," Aria said. Her voice traveled clean. She didn't look at him. She addressed the room. "The Hale Foundation funded an organization called Redwood Families," she said. "Many of you know this. You've donated at tables like these. You've cut ribbons. Some of you have the photos framed in your halls. You believed we were doing good. So did I." She inhaled. The braces were a hard, steady line under her. "What you didn't know is that Redwood Families also ran something it called Category S, high sensitivity placements." She nodded toward Mina at the back, who had lifted a hand to signal that the deck was ready. The LED screen behind Victor flickered and then filled with email excerpts and ledger entries, the numbers marching in a language even the uninitiated could read. Money in, orders out. "In those sensitive placements," Aria went on, "babies from what internal documents called reputational risk families were removed at birth and placed without due process." She swallowed. "7 years ago, my child was taken from me in a hospital room under orders conveyed by my father's office, and I was told he was stillborn." Noise moved through the room like wind through a field. Victor opened his mouth. Rowan stepped closer to the mic without quite touching it. "We have documentation," he said, his voice the controlled temperature of a controlled burn, including internal emails and a wire ledger linking Hale Foundation grants to these Category S placements. We also have a sworn statement from a nurse on shift the night of Miss Hale's delivery." He signaled, and the speakers filled with a woman's steady voice telling a room full of expensively dressed people about security at doors where family should have been, a bracelet with a star and orders from the family. Ethan didn't need a microphone when he spoke. The room was listening by then. "I adopted my son in good faith," he said, words landing like stones in a pond, clean and unhurried. "The agency told me his mother was unknown. They said he'd been surrendered. They sent him home with a star pendant and a file that starts with a number. His mother is not unknown. She is known. She is here." Mina brought up the page with the DNA results. Aria didn't look at the percentages. She looked out at a sea of faces, some open in shock, some shuddered under calculation, some angry on her behalf, some angry that the story had broken this way and not another. Victor reached for the mic. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "We take on cases no one else will touch. We act with mercy to protect young women from predatory men and children from chaos. My daughter was under duress. There were concerns about her boyfriend's intentions. I acted to safeguard my family and the company so that the thousands of employees under our care could." "You didn't protect me," Aria said into her mic without raising her voice. "You erased me." Silence. It was thick enough to feel. Rowan lifted a hand. "One more item," he said. The screen changed. A Hale International internal memo appeared, date stamped 2 years prior, the night of Aria's crash. "Avoid paparazzi at all costs," the subject line read. The body was worse. "Driver instructed to expedite egress, route to be taken at speed, discretion paramount." It didn't say cause, it suggested culture. It suggested a climate in which optics mattered more than safety. Iris Tan made a small sound, somewhere between a breath and a confession. "I didn't see that," she said, too loudly to be an aside. She swallowed. She lifted her hand without looking at Victor. "I resign," she said, not to him but to the room, to the row of board members who sat like a wall of suits under their own weight. The board chair, a man with hair too perfect to be entirely his, stood. He'd gone white beneath his tan. "We will call an emergency session," he said. "Effective immediately, Mr. Hale will take a leave of absence pending investigation." "Cowardice," Victor said, the word slipping out before he could polish it. "You'll destroy the company over and over, eh?" He stopped himself, but the word had gathered itself anyway like a storm. Aria turned to him at last. She had expected to feel triumph. She felt nothing like it. "I don't want to destroy anything," she said. "I want to stop what is rotten from spreading. If you want redemption, you can come sit with me in therapy and in courtrooms and in rooms with no cameras and listen to the people you call out of their names. You can do the work, but you don't get to hold the steering wheel while you learn." There were cameras, of course. There were always cameras. Arya felt the red dots like insect eyes at the edges of the room. She remembered to breathe. She remembered the star that had dented and the space it had left. They stepped down together, Grace steady as bedrock, Rowan's arm a bracket of strength without possession. Ethan met them by the door with a nod that said more than the room would let any of them say. Max was in a quiet lounge down the corridor, coloring under Grace's earlier instructions, the star at his throat catching and throwing the lights like it knew where to send them. In the lounge, the air felt like a different city. The carpet muffled the world. Max looked up at their faces and then back down at the soccer player he was coloring. He had made the jersey a blazing, impossible orange. "Kiddo," Ethan said, crouching. His voice was rough. "We need to tell you something." There was a family therapist's card on the coffee table, Dr. Lenore K., neat black letters. She'd sat with them the day before to help plan this moment and had said gently that children can hold more truth than adults think if you give it to them at the right size. "We found out something important about your family," Ethan said, "and it's good news, but it's big." Max regarded him with the solemn interest of someone assessing if a magic trick was about to happen. "Is it about secrets?" he asked. "A little," Ethan said. He glanced up at Arya and Rowan and nodded. "Go on." Arya moved the last step forward so she was in his line of sight. She didn't kneel, her braces didn't allow it, but she lowered herself in her chair so he didn't have to crane his neck. "Max," she said softly, "remember how you said the star came with you?" He nodded, fingers tightening around the crayon. "I put it there," she said. She felt the words go through her body like a wire carrying current. "When you were born, I put that star with you so I would know you anywhere. And I found you, we found you." Max's eyes flitted to the pendant, then back to her face. His mouth made a small O. "Does that mean you're my—" "It means I'm your mother," Arya said. The word slid into the air and settled like something that had been waiting for its chair. Max looked at Ethan, whose eyes had filled. "Do I still get to live with you?" he asked, voice smaller than Arya had ever heard it. "You will always live with me," Ethan said. His hand went to his chest as if he had to keep his heart inside. "You don't lose anything, you get." "Extra?" Max's gaze turned to Rowan, curious. "And you?" "I'm the man who loved your mom before either of us knew what we were doing," Rowan said, the corner of his mouth lifting. "And it turns out I'm your father. If you want, you can call me Rowan until we both get used to having something bigger to call each other." Max sat with this, chewing the inside of his cheek. He set the orange crayon down carefully and selected a blue. He filled in the cleats. "Can everyone come to my game on Saturday?" he asked without looking up. All three adults answered at the same time. "Yes." "Okay," Max said, as if that settled it. He glanced up then, small and earnest. "And you can help me blow out the candles again." "Team sport." Arya's breath hitched into a laugh that didn't break. "Team sport," she said. They didn't stay for the end of the gala. There was nothing left there for any of them. By Monday, headlines would pile up like snow. Investigations would start, statements would be issued, donors would call their assistants and then their lawyers. Dr. Mara Keene would resign from Redwood Families for personal reasons in a press release that might make one or two people retch quietly in the dark. Over the weekend, they reclaimed something small and true. They met again at the patisserie that had been a hinge between lives. The staff pretended not to recognize Arya from the broadcasts and, in pretending, honored her more than they knew. Max wore his soccer cleats because that was his version of formal wear. Ethan carried a duffel with gloves and a ball and the air of a man who was learning to drive a new road without losing the one he'd always taken. Rowan brought a simple paper bag and looked surprised at himself for being nervous. They ordered a small cake, lemon with vanilla frosting this time, and 2 candles at Max's insistence. "One for wishes," he said, arranging them with the gravity of a jeweler, "and one for promises." "Seems like a lot to ask from wax," Ethan said, smiling. "We can carry the rest," Rowan said, and Arya felt it like a hand at the small of her back. Before they lit the candles, Rowan slid the paper bag across to Arya. "For you," he said, "from a little shop that still thinks a telephone should ring instead of sing." Inside was a delicate silver star charm, not to replace what had been lost, but to flank it. On one side, Max's name in tiny script. On the other, 06.18. Arya turned it in her hand. It caught the light like water. The space on her bracelet where the original star was missing remained a wound and a sign. She clipped the new star next to the gap, not to fill it, but to mark the fact that absence doesn't have to be emptiness. It can be a doorway. Max watched and then, solemn as a priest, touched the pendant at his throat to hers. "Now they're friends," he declared. The candles went up in two small flames. They wavered, then steadied. Arya took a breath and didn't rush it. Ethan's hand steadied the plate. Max leaned in, eyes bright. Rowan's shoulder brushed hers, accidental and not. They blew together, 4 breaths across 2 flames, and it felt like the simplest miracle a city had ever seen. "Power up," Max whispered, and if Arya's eyes stung, if Ethan's voice went ragged on a laugh, if Rowan's hand trembled when he reached for the knife, no one called it anything but what it was: a family learning new steps to a song that had been theirs all along. Outside, the glass towers kept glittering. Inside, sugar stuck to fingertips, and promises were made not with speeches or cameras but with appointments scribbled into calendars, with therapy sessions booked, with soccer game times shared and circled, with 3 adults exchanging phone numbers under each other's real names. Later, Arya would receive a message from her father that tried to be a beginning. It would not be enough. It would not have to be. Karma was not a lightning bolt tonight. It was a slow, public accounting already in motion. It was a man who would show up to court dates and sit in chairs he didn't control if he meant what he said about mercy. It was a foundation diverted from harm and remade into something transparent enough that children ceased to be footnotes. They walked out into the bright afternoon when the cake was just crumbs and a paper box. Max insisted on showing them his step over soccer trick on the plaza. He did it twice, once perfect, once a stumble that sent him into Arya's lap in a pile of laughs. People in 2 good shoes hurried past with 2 urgent plans and didn't know the center of a city had shifted a fraction of an inch toward true. Arya tipped her face to the sun and felt its ordinary warmth. She thought of the night she'd tried to blow out all the candles alone and the way a little boy's question had refilled her lungs. She thought of a greenhouse where bad paper was put under good light. She thought of the sound a room makes when the truth enters it and is not turned away. When they said goodbye, it was with the ease of people who had decided to keep finding their way back. Ethan hoisted the duffel over his shoulder, the habit of a man always ready to carry extra. Rowan squeezed her hand, the space of years between them a bridge now instead of a wall. Max kissed his star and made his new and old parents do the same, a ritual as binding as any signature. The wind lifted, and the Hale International flags clattered their bright noise. Arya looked up at the building's mirrored skin and saw 4 figures reflected back at her, a woman sitting taller than she ever had, 2 men braced not against each other but beside, and a boy with a star, all of them cut into the glass and made whole again in the way only reflections can manage, showing not what is behind the surface, but what stands before it, claiming its own light.